And another class in the bunker is off and running. Away we go. One of the things I'm noticing, we're getting back to church now, and we're getting a little bit busier, and so I'm grateful in the midst of all of that you're taking time to spend a few minutes with us and be able to enjoy the things that we're doing here. Now, and just a reminder, if you're not able to catch this on Facebook, we're also on YouTube, so that you can actually follow up on that pretty well. And Apple Podcasts are also out there. We are everywhere trying to do this. So, as we begin, I want you to think about a dilemma that we sometimes face here, and that is when you start up in like a new social media situation, like you're signing up for Facebook or whatever you're trying to do. One of the things that you'll put in some information, and then they want that picture, that profile picture. Now think about how we do this. We say, okay, I'm going to put a picture of me that's going to be on my Facebook page or my web page, or I'm going to send a picture of me. And this is going to tell the world who I am. You got this picture. So, and some people will just kind of, there's a picture in their car and they're looking just a little bit frozen. I think most of us are going to say, I'm going to put a picture out there that's representative of who I am. This is me. You're going to look at this and you're going to go, oh, that's who he is, or that's what she does. For instance, if you're a grandparent, sometimes we'll see a lot of Facebook profile pictures, and this is a happy grandma, and she's got pictures of her grandkids, or picture with her grandkids, or of her family, and anybody looking in on this Facebook profile picture would say, this is somebody who loves her family or loves her grandkids, and they know that in a heartbeat. Similarly, there might be somebody who's kind of an outdoor kind of guy, and he's a hunter and fisher, and and he's going to get a picture of him, and he's going to be, here's his Facebook profile picture, and he's standing on top of a mountain, or he's got his trusty 30-06, he's ready to go, or he's with after he shot a deer, or whatever, and you're going to look at it and say, this is an outdoors guy. And you're going to know that just simply by taking a look at the picture, and that's going to be the identity. That's the image of us that we want the world to be aware of, is that picture profile of us. Wouldn't it be interesting if we also had a picture of us on the inside? We do, but that profile picture on the inside would be the picture of who we are to us, not necessarily to the world, but this is who we are to us. Because I suspect, and certainly by experience I've found, is that our inside pictures are often different than our outside pictures. We want the world to know this, but privately our inside picture might be quite different. We see ourselves in a different light. When we look at ourselves in the mirror, and I'm not thinking about that one first thing in the morning with all the wrinkles and wobbly hair and all that, but it's the image of us. The world may see somebody confident out there. We have a picture of us as somebody who's much less confident and much more shy, or much more beat up by life. And we put that outside picture for them to see, but we live off and we make decisions about the inside picture, that image of us. Now, why is that going to be important, I think, to some of the images and imaginings that we're going to talk about today, especially when we get to the Tower of Babel? Well, it's because that inside picture is such a driving force about who we are and what we do, and how we position ourselves, and the daily decisions that we make. In times past, we have talked about the function of the amygdala, that little almond-shaped dude right at the base of our brain, who's kind of the flight controller of threat and anticipation, and it's looking ahead and trying to figure out where things are and what's coming up and what should we be prepared for. The amygdala in most cases is looking for threat and saying, at what point do we turn on the body's defenses to be able to shut everything down or to prepare it to run or fight or hide or whatever that's going to be. That's going to be the job of the amygdala. And so this amygdala then is going to then be saying, okay, now I'm going to assess threat. And so in order to do that, it's going to picture if what I'm looking at or what I'm viewing is going to continue on, will that be a danger to me, or is that a nice place to look at going forward? For instance, if you're driving along and you happen to drive across a railroad track and your car gets stuck on the railroad track and you happen to look down the line and you see a train coming, part of the job of the amygdala is that it's going to picture what may happen if we just sit here. And so in a flash, even at the moment where you're trying to open your car door and get out of that car, or you're trying one more time to start the car, the amygdala is already picturing in your mind, on the right side of your brain, the train hurtling towards you, the train hitting the car being smashed, and maybe you being injured or killed. That a picture is immediately happening. Tell me if you're a mother and suddenly you don't know where your kids are, that your brain immediately, with the help of the amygdala, is not going to picture, oh, they've gone to lay down in their little bed. It's like the worst case scenario is being pictured by they're gone, and then you start worrying because all the things that could happen. And you're not just thinking about that they could happen, you're picturing that those things are going to happen. And your amygdala fires up your adrenaline and all that kind of thing based on the idea, not that it might happen. The amygdala doesn't know whether it's going to happen or it's really happening now. It just says, it's really happening now. And we got to go, and we're going to fire up the adrenaline, go find the kid, go get off the train tracks. All of those things come to bear because of the pictures and imagining that we have in our head. That's a pretty powerful organism. So what it ultimately causes us to do is make decisions and choices based on those pictures, based on what we're imagining. If you're asked to give a talk in church and you imagine yourself standing there comfortably telling a joke, you imagine the people in church laughing at your joke, and it's comfortable and they're enjoying you, and you see that picture of that happening. Your body's reaction to that is much different than, as I was teasing somebody the other day, that he was picturing himself giving a talk, picturing himself stuttering, picturing himself stuck, and then I finished it off for him and said, and then you're picturing yourself passing out, and then you fall across right into your bishop's lap, and everybody is laughing, and then you wake up and find the paramedics that are there, and they're having to haul you off on a gurney because you passed out while you were trying to give a talk in church. Now, if his amygdala was already picturing that, what's happening is that his adrenaline is already responding to the fact that he's now being hauled off on a gurney, and he's already picturing it 5 steps ahead. That imagining is incredibly powerful and fires up so many things about us, and then causes us to choose what we do based on what we picture and the story that we're going to tell about it. So my friend that was worried about passing out in front of the bishop and the congregation and being hauled out on a gurney, that will mark his decision when the bishop's counselor comes to ask him if he'll give a talk in church. That's an easy decision for him. No, I don't do that. He's not going to say, no, I don't do that because I'm going to pass out in church and have the paramedics come and get me. But it will make sure that he doesn't agree ever to talk in church, because there is a fear of that. And that imagining, that imaginary picturing is what drives all of that and how that works. Now, the power of imagination is what we're going to talk about today, because even the Lord is aware and worried about our imagining and our imaginations. Let me give you a really good example of that. If we go into the Old Testament, what we're going to find here is, for instance, the Lord's going to say to Moses, as the people are out of Egypt and they're wandering in the wilderness and they're about done with all of their wanderings, here's the Lord's worry. He says, "Ye have seen the Egyptian abominations, their idols, their wood and stone, silver and gold. Among them you could see all the trappings of Egypt. And lest there be any man among you, man or woman or family, of the house of Israel, whose heart turneth away this day from the Lord our God, and go to serve the gods of these nations." You think, well, after everything he did in Egypt with all of the plagues and the pillar of fire and the parting of the Red Sea, the Lord is still worried that after all of that, there's still a worry that they're going to go after the gods of these nations who are focused on idols and silver and gold and all of that. Why would they do that? Well, the Lord's going to state pretty clearly here that it'll come to pass that when this man, all of these people here, heareth the words of the curse, I'm going to say, if you don't do it, here's the things that are going to happen. That he will, and I love this phrase, he will bless himself in his heart. It won't be God blessing him. He's going to self-bless inside his heart, inside his picturing, inside his imaginations. He's going to self-bless himself, saying, what will he say? "I shall have peace in my life," as I'm blessing myself, "though I walk in the imaginations of my heart." I'm going to be picturing myself, blessing myself. It's the evil side of self-reliance. I am going to be self-reliant because I'm going to be blessing myself. I will rely on my arm, not the arm. I'm going to rely on the arm of flesh, not the arm of God. I'm going to self-bless, and I shall have peace because I'm strong. I will have peace because I'm going to walk in the imagination of my heart. And the Lord adds this addendum, and it is so visual. He says, to add drunkenness to thirst. You're going to thirst for power, or you're going to thirst for safety, or you're going to thirst for peace. But what you're going to choose to drink will make you drunk. It won't satisfy your thirst. So congratulations, those of you who are going to be evilly, wickedly self-reliant. You wanted peace, you drank out of the wrong cup, and now you're still thirsty and you're drunk. It's messed with your thinking and your thoughts. Jesus later on, thousands of years later, is going to say, "And anyone who drinks from my cup will never thirst." If you drink from the cup of your own self-deceit and conceit, you're going to thirst again. In fact, you'll be drunk. Beautiful image about saying, this is what happens when we have what we're going to call vain imaginations. It is vain picturing of our own selves and our own strengths that are going to lead us to be drunk instead of having a quenched thirst. Now, where are we going to see all of this? Well, what we're going to find is that in the Old Testament, the word imagination actually has two Hebrew roots. And both of them are going to come into play. Kind of interesting. In the very first part of Genesis, when they use the word imagination, the word is zamam. And what it means is plotting and scheming. It's what Cain and his people did. They were imagining in their hearts. They were plotting and scheming how to get property and shed blood and get away with it. That's the imaginations of Cain's heart, of a mayhem focus on things, which is, how do I get away from things? I'm going to sit and plot and think. Think about how the mafia does it, as they're going to make money, but they're going to do it by illegal means, and they're plotting and thinking about who they bump off and who they prop up and how they protect themselves from their illegal activities. Well, that's zamam. It's plotting and scheming. Very interesting that when we get to Jeremiah, though, a contemporary of Lehi, and he's watching what's going on in Jerusalem enough that Lehi has to take his family and flee into the wilderness. Certainly they were doing zamaming. They were being, Lehi and Jeremiah and the prophets of the time were being plotted and schemed against, no doubt. But Jeremiah uses another term which I think also embodies what this is. And Jeremiah, when he uses the word imagination, his word for that is going to be shariruth. And what that means is knotted and twisted and rigid. If you're going to have, what he's going to say is, if you spend your life plotting and scheming and imagining yourself in control, you're going to slowly twist yourself into a knot, a rigid knot that you can't get past, and it will knot up everything you do and cause you to be bound really to your thoughts, bound to your evil schemes. And I love the idea, the difference between this plotting and scheming and knottedness that people that are about evil do, versus when God comes to Enoch and Melchizedek and he lives in their city and they're able to have peace. There's no scheming, there's no knottedness, there's just relaxation, peace, trust. God is in our midst, we are safe. If we're going to rely on our own arm and our own plots and our own schemes that binds us up in, again, what even Lehi is going to call vain imaginations, the way that we think and what we do. Now, where do we see that most clearly? Well, let's really kind of go where we were looking to go, and that is as Nimrod builds Babel. The word, it's actually pronounced Babel, which would drive us crazy if I kept using the word Babel. So we'll just call it Babel, but recognize it's Babel. Now, Cush begets Nimrod, and he's a mighty one on the earth, and he's a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. So he's got certain renown as being a great hunter. Now, side note, love this. Hebrew myth and mythology suggests that one of the stories that's told about Nimrod is that he found a way to steal the Adam's original coat of skins that had been given to Noah, who had been given to Shem, and that Nimrod somehow finds a way to steal from Shem Adam's original coat of skins. And then he puts it on. And according to Hebrew lore, it smells like the Garden of Eden. And that animals will smell the Garden of Eden on that coat of skins being worn by Nimrod. And they will come up to him to smell that because it feels and smells safe. Which is funny that obviously it's happening centuries after Adam. But that's the lore. And then as these animals would come close to smell the Garden of Eden, then he shoots them. So shooting deer in a barrel kind of thing because he's got the right coat. That's one of those side things. Anyway, here's what we do know about Nimrod. In the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. So Nimrod establishes Babel. What does he do there? Well, they said, those under Nimrod said to one another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly, and they had brick for stone and slime they had for mortar. That's interesting, because most of the early Canaanite buildings that they find and the very earliest Hebrew buildings are all made out of stone. Certainly, when you look at the base of what was Solomon's temple and then the temple of Herod, these are massive stones that were cut and moved into place to form the foundation of the temple. For the time, at Nimrod's time, this is new technology, that they're going to not just have sun bricks, but they're going to have bricks that they have burned thoroughly, and then they're going to use slime for mortar. In a sense, we've done this new thing. We're not using stone, we're using bricks that we have made with our own ingeniousness, our own arms of flesh. It's a temple we are building from scratch, from the bottom up, that we have done. And they said, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, lest we be scattered upon the face of the whole earth. We're going to build a city and a tower by our own ingenuity and by our own strength, our own scheming, our own twistedness. We're going to build this city so that nobody can scatter us. Our enemies won't be able to attack us. We're going to be taking care of ourselves. Now, it's also been suggested, and we're kind of guessing on some of this. Sometimes some of the early church leaders talked about the fact that perhaps they could see the city of Enoch, or there was history of the city of Enoch. And what they were actually building was a temple in direct response to the altars of Adam. They were going to build their own building of brick, of their own ingenuity, and they were worshiping themselves. And you kind of get a suggestion of this perhaps when we say, if we do this, we will make us a name. We will make us a name. Recall that the angel, in talking to Adam and Eve, is going to say to them, everything you're going to do now is going to be done in the name of the Son, so that you will worship Him forevermore. That's the name you should carry, and that's the name that will keep you safe. And these people in Babel under Nimrod are going to say, we're going to build something that keeps us safe by our own strength, and as a result of that, we will have a name. We don't necessarily need the name of God, because we'll have the name of Babel or the name of Nimrod, and nobody's going to mess with us because we are Babelians. We are Nimrodians. Nobody's going to touch us. And so you get that. We're going to choose our own name. It's a similar sort of way that Moses runs into with Pharaoh. And he says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, in whose name? And he says, in the name of I am, the one that exists. And Pharaoh's response is, who am I? Who is this God? To worship Him. Who is He? I have the name. I'm Pharaoh. I don't need Jehovah. I'm Pharaoh. I have the name, and people stay safe through the name of Pharaoh. You don't mess with me. In the Roman Empire, the same kind of thing was, I have the name of Caesar, and you don't mess with a Caesarite, because of the name will protect us. Well, they're going to do the same thing here. And it's in the imaginations of their heart that they see themselves greater than God, and they begin to scheme and plot how to keep them safe, how to get their own peace without God. Again, it's the evil side of self-reliance. Now, we actually get, how did they do this? We actually get an interesting parallel story on the original site of the Tower of Babel. And that is Nebuchadnezzar, during the time of Lehi, is going to do the same. He's going to rebuild the temple of Babel. in Babylon, which is where Babel was, Babylon. And he's going to rebuild it. And the beautiful thing is we still have carved in cuneiform this wonderful image of Nebuchadnezzar and the plans for this temple of Babylon, the Tower of Babylon, and the Mesopotamian ziggurat. It is this building right here that we have an image of what they were projecting to build. This is filled up inside here. It's not like an Egyptian pyramid where it's hollow inside. It's filled all the way up. What's it filled up with? Bricks baked in the sun, and it's going to be tall here. That is the Tower of Nebuchadnezzar, and copying the Tower of Babylon, the Tower of Babel. Now, how is he going to do this? Where does he get the work to do this? And think about how we picture the Tower of Babel and the scattering that happened here. Look at what Nebuchadnezzar is doing. He says, in order to complete, this is his words, in order to complete the tower to the top, and by the way, he was never able to finish it, I mobilized all countries everywhere. Each and every ruler had been raised to prominence over all the people of the world as one loved by Marduk. And that is the Babylonian god, Marduk. And so it was, we're building this tower to Marduk. And everybody that is a worshiper of Marduk is going to be gathered together to provide the labor to build this thing. This will be a gathering, not a scattering in their mind. From the upper sea to the lower sea, to the distant nations, to the teeming people of the world, kings of remote mountains and far-flung islands in the midst of the upper and lower seas. Babylon is being the gathering place for people to come and build this tower. It's the complete contrasting opposite of what happened in the Tower of Babel. Completely opposite of this. But this is what they were doing. And I think that's fascinating that we get a chance to see how that works. Now, what's the Lord's response, though, to these kind of towers? And again, we have records from Babylon and from the Nebuchadnezzar times that they were never able to complete it. The Joseph Smith translation gives us this. Talking about Nimrod's little exercise there in the valley of Shinar. He says, and the Lord said, now, if they do this thing, nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined, which they have schemed about. If they complete this, who knows where their imaginations take them next. And I think what he's saying, without saying it, and as a result of that, my people, those that believe in me, will never be safe because they're scheming, because they're twisted, tying themselves into this will exclude and threaten all those who would worship God. Nothing will be restrained which they have imagined, except I, the Lord, confound their language that they may not understand one another's speech. Now, this is interesting because we have to look at this a couple of different ways. So I, the Lord, will scatter them abroad from thence, from all the face of the land into every quarter of the earth. Just the opposite of what Nebuchadnezzar was trying to do. Now, traditionally, here is there are two ways to look at this. Traditionally, we have always said this. He needed to scatter them. So he scattered them by confounding their language. And by confounding their language, they then were unable to complete the tower, and they scattered in all directions. And again, that's the traditional way that we look at it. The way that the Joseph Smith translation phrases this, though, it may actually, what's just as plausible as just the opposite of this. We could easily say, so I, the Lord, will scatter them abroad from thence on all the face of the land, and as a result, that will confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. We know that in the study of ancient languages, and they've tried to track how languages develop, a scattered people develop their own language. They change the language to fit their situation and who they are. And so it's actually just as plausible that the Lord said, in order to scatter their language, I will scatter them physically. And actually that fits pretty close with the pattern that we see all the way through the Old Testament, especially is the fact that righteousness gathers, think the city of Enoch, wickedness always scatters. Think about Jerusalem and the children of Israel. The more righteous you are, the more you are gathered to one heart, to one nation. You build Zion, you come together. We are sealed together. We come close to the face of God. Everything about righteousness is closeness and close proximity. We love gathering with our family. We get close to those that we love. The marital act itself is becoming one. Everything is about joining and coming together. Wickedness in and of itself scatters and divides, and contention polarizes us. Think about where the world is at the moment, how polarized we are as we are separated into our own camps. In the Book of Mormon talks about one of the ways you could tell that they had become the people of God is that there were no more ites. That the ites were gone. And you knew that when they were beginning to be more wicked at the end of 4th Nephi, when they started iting again. We're all mixed together, but we're going to choose to call ourselves Lamanites, whether that's actually our lineage or not. We're going to choose, that'll be our appellation. That's our name we're going to choose for ourselves. We're Lamanites. Meaning we're not you. And now they begin to split, and that sets up wickedness and destruction down the road here. Okay? So I, the Lord, will scatter them. And he did. Remember, the brother of Jared is saying, I hope we won't be scattered as well. We're going to gather. Now, in order to do that, we're going to move together. That will preserve our language as we go forward. Okay? Now, what the Lord is trying to accomplish by this scattering is trying to stop the imaginations and the machinations as they think and scheme and knot themselves up to destruction and to evil. And it's those vain imaginations that do that. Do you think it's any wonder, for instance, when Lehi, Lehi's great and spacious building, and he has this initial dream, and it's so powerful that Nephi wants to see it as well. And Nephi's trying to get from the angel, his angel guide, and saying, what do all these pieces mean? It seems like it's a little symbolic. Okay? And what he's going to be told by the angel is, you know that large and spacious building that which your father saw? Guess what? It's the vain imaginations and the pride of the children of men. They have schemed, they have built, they have knotted themselves into their way of thinking. They have a twisted way of looking at salvation. It's the vain imaginations and the pride of the children of men. And you got to love this. It's here, and there's a hint here. And a great and terrible gulf divideth them. Remember, the vain imaginations cause a dividing, cause a separating. Pretty hard not to picture the fact that for a Jewish prophet at the time of Jeremiah, who is seeing this building And he's being told it's the vain imaginations of the world. It's not hard to picture that at least at some level, at least symbolically, that Lehi isn't seeing the Tower of Babel. Because it fits the description of what's in Genesis. And I'm assuming that as a prophet, as a Jewish man, probably Lehi could have come close to quoting Genesis. And he's seeing a large building filled with vain imaginations that separates them from the righteous. Has scattered them. Well, I think that's what he's looking at. At least that spirit of Babel exists in this dream. Now, as we're looking at this then, those vain imaginations, let's go back to what we were talking about in the beginning, and that is our own imaginations. Those imaginations in terms of planning for our lives and preparing and seeing where we want to be really help us. But when we start taking a look at vain imaginations, now we start thinking and plotting and planning about things that we can do by our own power. I find it so fascinating that one of the things that Hollywood is so invested in, over and over and over, the theme in so many movies, especially to a lot of children's movies, especially carry this theme. Don't let anybody tell you you can't do anything that you want to do. Don't let you live your dreams. You go do what you want to do. Well, isn't it interesting? Those can turn into vain imaginations. Because somewhere in our imagining, we may have our imagining about what we would like to do, but is that really what God wants us to do? So, I think those questions that we have to ask ourselves. In the thoughts of our hearts, when we're thinking, and inside all of that, are those thoughts leading us to peace or a twisted knot? In other words, when you think and plan for and prepare for and you look into the future, as a result of doing this, are you more at peace? Or do you find yourself kind of twisting a bit? I love that idea. Stress and anxiety causes this twisting and turning a bit, and robs us of joy as our amygdala is worried about the future. Because when we're at that twisted point, oftentimes we're saying, I have to do this, or I can't do this, or I'm powerless to do this. It is based on our twisting, and our imaginations are built on whether we have the power to do it or not. Those can become vain imaginations. That's why when we take a look in the church and are invested in trying to make sure that we are self-reliant, over and over and over, the self-reliance classes are telling us, in order to be self-reliant, be reliant first off on God. Then be interreliant to those around you who have knowledge and understanding, who love you, run your ideas by them, get the knowledge and understanding from them. What they're saying is you're going to be self-reliant as you're not. You're going to be self-reliant as you love God and do what He wants you to do, not what you want to do. And you're going to be self-reliant as you allow yourself to be aided and assisted by others who want to help you become what you need to be, what the Lord wants you to be. So when your imagining is in gear, are you at peace, or are you knotted up? Do those thoughts that you're having in those imaginings, Does that draw you closer to others, or does that divide it? Does that divide you? Do your imaginations push people away or draw them close? Do we constantly image ourselves in the future in the worst possible light? When you're doing those imagining, where does that put you? What do you see yourself doing? And then do you feel your heart start to twist or rest? So, last point, and then we shall be done here. I love this quote from, actually coming from Joseph Smith, and he's writing in Liberty Jail. And in the midst of some of those letters, we find this advice to the church that is been scattered by the Missourians. They are scattered across the face of Missouri, and they're crossing the Mississippi into Illinois, kind of bleeding and wet and cold. And in the midst of all of that, here's what Joseph Smith is going to say in this general epistle to the church at large. He's going to say, a fanciful and flowery, heated imagination beware of. Because the things of God are of deep import, and time and experience and careful and ponderous and solemn thoughts can only find them out. And he says that's opposite of those heated imaginations. How much more dignified and noble are the thoughts of God than the vain imaginations of the human heart? Why is that important? Because none but fools will trifle with the souls of men. How vain and trifling have been our spirits, our conferences, our councils, our meetings, our private as well as public conversations. Too low, too mean, too vulgar, too condescending for the dignified characters of the called and chosen of God. I think what he would be saying is, imagine if you will, but imagine God in charge. If you're going to think ahead, imagine God doing what He will do. Avoid at all costs the vain imaginations that will cause us to live in fear, cause us to have an over-reliance on our own abilities, and will cause us to be not somebody who can work with the souls of men. And so often that may be in our midst. So if you're watching this around Thanksgiving time, use this as an opportunity at Thanksgiving to have non-trifling, dignified, noble conversations with your family or the holidays. I think that would be the best way to go, and not rely on your own imagination. Brothers and sisters, bear you my testimony that the Lord intends us to imagine us in His arms, imagine us in His presence, and because of that, imagine us being like Him. And I bear that testimony to you, and I do it in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.